In 2014, deep in the Țarcu Mountains of Romania's southern Carpathians, conservationists released the first 17 European bison back into a wild they had vanished from nearly 2 centuries prior. The project aimed to revive Europe's largest land mammal and gradually restore the local ecosystem. Yet just a decade later, data from satellites, camera traps, GPS collars, and field surveys revealed outcomes that defied all expectations. Not only did the bison herd thrive and multiply, but the entire Carpathian landscape is now transforming at a pace that is forcing ecologists to fundamentally rethink the role of mega-herbivores in sustaining forest ecosystems. A kingdom once ruled by giants for millennia, before humans reshaped the face of Europe. The Carpathian Mountains stood as one of the continent's vastest and most pristine wildernesses. Deep within these ancient forests, a massive creature quietly molded the entire ecosystem, the European bison, also known as the wisent. As Europe's largest surviving land mammal, a mature bull can weigh nearly a ton, stand close to 6 feet tall at the shoulder, and pack enough raw power to snap saplings with a single headbutt. However, what made them the true kings of the Carpathians was never just their sheer size, it was their irreplaceable role in keeping the forest alive. Unlike many herbivores that confine themselves to small ranges, bison are constantly on the move, seeking out a diverse diet. A single adult can devour 65 to 70 pounds of vegetation daily, ranging from grasses and leaves to young shoots and tree bark. This continuous foraging effectively turns them into nature's ecosystem engineers. As the herd grazes down shrubs and saplings, they punch small openings into the dense forest canopy, letting sunlight pierce through to the forest floor for the first time in ages. Before long, these sunlit patches are carpeted with fresh grass, wildflowers, and a tapestry of plant life that could never survive in the deep shade of old-growth forests. Fascinatingly, bison never live in isolation from the rest of the forest. They are part of an ecological web forged over tens of thousands of years of evolution. Each season triggers a distinct migratory pattern. In spring and summer, the herd seeks out sprawling meadows and sun-drenched clearings where new growth offers peak nutritional value. When winter blankets the Carpathian slopes in snow, they move down into lower valleys, where the winds die down and forage can still be found beneath a thin layer of snow. These generational migrations have carved countless natural trails through the woods. Over time, these paths become wildlife highways used not just by bison, but by red deer, wild boars, gray wolves, brown bears, and many other species. In other words, long before humans cleared the first roads through the Carpathians, these bison had already established a living network that allowed life to circulate across the mountains. They didn't just alter the flora, they dictated how hundreds of other species moved, fed, and survived in one of Europe's last remaining wild frontiers. But that was only the beginning. As they roam, bison disperse the seeds of over 200 plant species through their dung, expanding the reach of local flora completely naturally. The shallow wallows they create while dust bathing to rid themselves of parasites turn into microhabitats perfect for various insects, especially wild bees and pollinators. These tiny insects kickstart an entire food chain, sustaining birds, amphibians, and countless other forest floor creatures. Today's ecologists call the European bison an ecosystem engineer, a species capable of altering its environment in ways that benefit hundreds of others. Essentially, anywhere the herd roams isn't just a feeding ground, it's a workspace where they silently reconstruct the ecosystem. Every meadow, clearing, wildflower carpet, and the sheer biodiversity of the Carpathians bears the stamp of these giants. For thousands of years, this natural machinery ran flawlessly because the forest's primary architect was always on the job. But that balance wouldn't last forever. Removing just one critical link would send a millennia-old ecological engine sliding toward collapse, erasing the forest's architect. Ultimately, This ecological engine began to unravel, not due to a natural disaster, but at the hands of humans, from the Middle Ages through the 18th century, as Europe's population boomed and kingdoms expanded. The pristine forests of the Carpathians were treated as a resource to be plundered. Timber was harvested to build cities and ships. Meadows were cleared for agriculture. The continuous woodlands that the bison called home were fragmented into isolated patches, compounding this. The European bison became a prized target for aristocratic hunters, with the downing of such a massive beast viewed as the ultimate symbol of power and status. Centuries of warfare further ravaged the forests, driving the remaining herds deeper into remote mountainous terrain. By the late 18th century, what once seemed impossible became reality. The last wild bison in Romania vanished. A species that had endured ice ages and survived countless climatic shifts over hundreds of thousands of years could not withstand a few centuries of human exploitation. With their disappearance, the Carpathians lost their largest animal and the very linchpin that kept the entire ecosystem stable. Few realized that losing the bison wasn't just the localized extinction of a single species. It was the abrupt halt of an ecological process that had run uninterrupted since the last ice age. Over millennia, nearly every plant and animal in the Carpathians had evolved to adapt to the presence of these massive herds. Many wildflowers relied on bison-created clearings for sunlight. Hundreds of insect species thrived on the organic matter and open dirt patches they left behind. Even many bird species chose to forage in areas the herd had just passed through, where the churned-up undergrowth exposed an abundance of seeds and insects. When that central link was pulled, nature had no quick fix. No other deer, elk, or livestock species possessed the size, foraging habits, or range to fill the bison's shoes. That ecological void persisted year after year, silently warping the very structure of the forest without anyone noticing. At first glance, the forest seemed unchanged. Trees still blanketed the slopes, streams still carved through the valleys, and spring still brought a flush of green leaves. But beneath that facade, a silent chain reaction had begun. Without bison herds constantly grazing on shrubs and saplings, the undergrowth grew unnaturally dense. The sunlit clearings that once nurtured meadows and wildflowers were gradually choked out by a closing canopy. As wildflowers dwindled, populations of bees and other pollinators plummeted. Consequently, the birds that relied on those insects were forced to abandon the places they had called home for generations. The domino effect didn't stop there. Without bison to distribute seeds over long distances, many plants lost a natural method of dispersal that had sustained them for thousands of years. Meadows shrunk, intensifying competition for food among red deer, roe deer, and other herbivores. The ecosystem didn't collapse overnight. It quietly grew poorer with every passing season, year, and generation. For nearly 2 centuries, the Carpathians still looked like an endless sea of green. But that green was an illusion. It was no longer the diverse, balanced forest of the past, but an ecosystem running without its master architect. As time wore on, almost no one believed this missing link could ever be restored until the spring of 2014, when a convoy carrying some very special passengers rolled into the Țarcu Mountains, launching the boldest experiment in the history of Romanian conservation. An experiment defying all expectations. In the spring of 2014, the nearly 2-century silence of the Țarcu Mountains was finally broken. After years of meticulous planning, Rewilding Europe and WWF Romania transported the first 17 European bison to the southern Carpathians. Just months later, another 10 arrived, bringing the first year's reintroduction total to 27. These individuals were carefully selected from various reserves across Europe to ensure genetic diversity, building a foundation for a healthy future population. Following an acclimation period in a semi-wild enclosure, The gates were finally thrown open. For the first time in nearly 200 years, European bison walked free on the very land their ancestors once ruled. In those early days, researchers took a completely hands-off approach to how the herd adapted to their new life. The bison chose their own paths, found their own water sources, and explored suitable foraging grounds, just as their ancestors had done for millennia. For researchers, this was the project's most critical phase. If the herd stayed close to the release site or relied on human handouts, the goal of establishing a truly wild population would fail. But before long, data from GPS collars proved otherwise. The bison began expanding their territory, crossing valleys, scaling ridges, and establishing steady seasonal routes between forests and meadows. Their movements weren't random. Every step reflected deeply hardwired foraging and survival behaviors passed down through generations. Even though these specific animals were born in captivity, it proved that the instincts of a keystone species remained fully intact, just waiting for the right moment to awaken once returned to the wild where they belonged. From the outset, scientists knew that bison were a keystone species, hoping their reintroduction would help patch the forest's broken ecological structure. Yet, there is always a massive gulf between scientific theory and real-world execution. No one could predict exactly how a population of just a few dozen individuals would adapt to a completely wild environment, whether they would successfully breed, or how many decades it would take to spark measurable change. Because of these unknowns, every single step the herd took was closely monitored from day one. Select individuals were fitted with GPS tracking collars to log their journeys. Hundreds of camera traps were deployed along forest trails. Drones periodically mapped the valleys to track changes in vegetation. Meanwhile, satellite imagery and field teams continuously gathered data on meadows, shrubs, insects, and other wildlife. With every passing season, thousands of new data points poured in, forming one of the most comprehensive rewilding monitoring programs in Europe. About a decade later, when researchers compiled the data from these independent methods, a clear trend emerged. The areas frequented by the bison looked distinctly different from the rest of the forest. Meadows expanded, plant life grew more diverse, and camera traps captured a growing number of wildlife species returning to the bison's stomping grounds. These changes weren't just isolated anomalies, they were widespread enough to be clearly visible from space. That was what truly caught the attention of the global ecological community. It wasn't just that the bison were impacting nature, which was expected, but that the speed and scale of the transformation blew past almost all initial models. In just a decade, a founding population of fewer than 30 individuals had successfully restarted ecological processes that had been frozen for nearly 2 centuries. As fresh data continues to emerge, scientists realize that this story is about much more than saving a single species from extinction. It is about the rebirth of an entire ecosystem. When an entire mountain range breathes again, these transformations don't just exist on scientific charts or satellite maps. They are unfolding daily in the heart of the Carpathian forest. Each day, the bison roam up to 9 miles in search of a varied diet. Along the way, they graze, snap saplings, and trample dense underbrush, inadvertently weaving a network of biological corridors through the valleys. Instead of letting the forest choke itself into a dense, uniform wall of trees, the bison maintain a natural mosaic of woodlands, meadows, and clearings, a structural mix that ecologists rank as the absolute gold standard for biodiversity. The ripple effects of these corridors spread quickly. Sunlight reaches the forest floor once again, triggering the germination of long-dormant grasses and wildflowers. Every spring, hundreds of plant species blanket clearings that were once smothered by brush. Right on their heels is the return of bees, butterflies, and countless other pollinators. Through bison dung, seeds are carried across the forest, allowing many plant species to expand their range exactly as they did for millennia before the bison vanished. This transformation is vividly captured by the camera traps in high-traffic bison areas. Researchers are logging a steady uptick in sightings of red deer, wild boars, Eurasian lynx, gray wolves, brown bears, and rare forest birds. The new meadows provide prime feeding grounds for herbivores, and predators are naturally following their prey back into the area. After nearly 2 centuries, a shattered food web is being reassembled, link by link. But this rebirth isn't just happening above ground, it's happening right beneath the forest litter, out of sight. Bison dung has become a vital nutrient source for dung beetles, fungi, and countless decomposers, pumping essential elements like nitrogen and phosphorus back into the soil. As the soil grows richer, its water retention capacity improves, making these areas far more resilient to summer droughts. At the same time, the herd's moderate trampling creates microdisturbances in the soil, giving seeds the perfect opportunity to hit moist earth and sprout, rather than turning into a homogeneous forest dominated by just a few species. The Carpathians are reclaiming a natural, multi-tiered mosaic layout. This structural diversity creates countless ecological niches, allowing a wider variety of species to coexist in the same footprint. Ecologists call this habitat heterogeneity and consider it a foundational pillar of a resilient ecosystem. Remarkably, the bison aren't doing any of this intentionally. They are simply living out their hardwired instincts. But those very instincts are quietly restoring the natural laws the forest lost nearly 2 centuries ago. Even more astonishing is how quickly the bison population itself has bounced back. From the initial 27 individuals released, the herd has consistently bred in the wild, right at the project's 10-year mark. The number of free-roaming bison in the Tsarku region has climbed to nearly 200, making it the largest wild bison population in Romania. Calves born entirely in the wild prove that a species missing from the country for 2 centuries no longer needs human handholding to survive. They have truly reclaimed their ability to self-sustain. This shift has transformed not just the forest, but also human perspectives. When the project launched, many locals worried that these multi-hundred-pound beasts would ruin pastures, compete with livestock for food, or pose a threat to communities. But after years of peaceful coexistence, social surveys show that roughly 89% of locals now view the bison as a proud symbol of the Carpathians and an indispensable part of their natural heritage. Once seen as a relic of the past, the bison is now living proof that if you return the right piece to the puzzle, nature will figure out how to heal itself. Yet, none of these findings shock the scientific community quite as much as an almost invisible metric. When researchers began measuring the sheer volume of carbon this revived ecosystem could trap, they realized the bison were delivering value that went far beyond basic conservation goals. What truly stunned the scientific world? If the story ended with the successful reintroduction of a species once extinct in the wild, the Romanian project would already be a milestone in conservation history. But research published over the last few years reveals that what's happening in the Tsarku Mountains is on a completely different scale. The bison herd isn't just restoring biodiversity. They are shifting how scientists view the role of megafauna in the global fight against climate change. For decades, conservation initiatives typically focused on isolated targets, saving a single bird species, protecting a specific mammal, or replanting a patch of forest. However, a growing body of research shows that nature doesn't operate in silos. The health of an ecosystem hinges on the interplay between species and daily ecological processes. When a keystone species vanishes, the fallout ripples through dozens, even hundreds of other species in subtle ways. Conversely, when that species returns, the recovery cascades just as widely. Ecologists call this trophic rewilding, restoring ecosystems by bringing back species that play central roles in food webs and natural processes. The Romanian project is now considered a textbook example of this theory. It demonstrates that sometimes the most effective way to restore nature isn't micromanaging every detail of a forest, but rather reinstating the very species that kept the forest self-regulating for millennia. For years, the go-to answer for carbon sequestration was simply planting more trees. However, ecologists increasingly recognize that a healthy forest isn't just a numbers game of tree counts. It depends on how the entire ecosystem functions. Without regulatory species like the bison, forests can become uniform, lose biodiversity, and see their natural regeneration stall. On the flip side, by creating clearings, maintaining meadows, dispersing seeds, and driving multi-tiered plant growth, bison make the entire ecosystem run more efficiently. This, in turn, boosts carbon storage capacities in both the soil and the vegetation. In 2024, a study published by scientists at Yale University dropped a figure that grabbed the attention of the global conservation community. They estimated that the population of roughly 170 bison in the Tsarku Range helps foster an ecosystem capable of absorbing and storing an amount of carbon equivalent to removing up to 84,000 gasoline-powered cars from the road each year. To be clear, this isn't carbon absorbed directly by the bison themselves, but rather the collective efficiency of the entire ecosystem they help revive and maintain. It means that by simply returning a keystone species to its rightful place, humans can trigger natural processes that deliver benefits on a scale vastly larger than anyone anticipated. By the close of 2024, Romania's free-roaming bison population surpassed the 200 mark, expanding their range across more than 35 square miles of rugged mountain terrain. What began as a standard animal reintroduction project has matured into one of Europe's most successful rewilding models. Scientists no longer view the bison merely as a species saved from the brink. They see them as ecosystem engineers, a vital link capable of restarting natural laws that had been broken for centuries. Perhaps most incredible of all is that it all started with just 27 individuals released in the spring of 2014. No heavy machinery, no technology trying to outsmart nature, just a conscious choice to give back the animal that belonged there all along. Nature took care of the rest in ways that even the most optimistic scientific models could never have fully mapped out. Ultimately, the story of Romania's bison is no longer just about an animal. It has become living proof that sometimes, to save an ecosystem, the first thing humans need to do isn't build more, it's know how to return what we took away. The true magic of this project isn't just that nearly 200 bison are walking free in the mountains of Romania after facing extinction in the wild. The magic lies in the realization that nature never forgot how to heal itself. When humans step back at the right moment and return the species that belongs there. Millions of years of evolutionary processes automatically kick back into gear. No one had to teach the bison how to clear the woods. No one showed them where to scatter seeds or how to sustain hundreds of insect, bird, and mammal species. It was all hardwired into nature's code long before humans ever arrived on the scene. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson the Carpathians have to offer. For centuries, humans believed that more intervention meant better control over nature. Yet reality often proves the exact opposite. The most powerful solutions don't always come from cutting-edge technology or billion-dollar initiatives. Sometimes, they simply begin by restoring a single broken link and then having the patience to let nature finish the job its own way. Today, herds of bison quietly roam the valleys of the southern Carpathians, just as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. Every footprint they leave behind doesn't just forge a trail through the woods. It carves out a whole new perspective on conservation to save nature. We must first allow nature to be itself. That's why the story of Romania's European bison reaches far beyond the success of a single conservation project. It forces us to ask a much bigger question: how many ecosystems around the world are still waiting for their missing ecosystem engineers to return, and how many places don't need more human intervention at all, but simply the chance to function the way evolution designed them to over millions of years? Today, herds of European bison once again move quietly through the valleys of the southern Carpathians, just as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. Every trail they carve through the forest represents more than the passage of a single species. It reflects a new understanding of conservation itself. Sometimes the best way to save nature isn't to control it, but to restore what was lost and allow it to do what it has always known how to do.